When you think of the grand classics of literature, you probably imagine leather-bound books on a dusty shelf, stories of star-crossed lovers in ballrooms, or perhaps a noble quest across a sweeping landscape. We tend to put these books on a pedestal, treating them as the sophisticated ancestors of modern storytelling. But if you actually peel back the elegant prose and look at the raw heart of these stories, you will find something terrifying. Some of the most foundational books in human history aren't just deep or philosophical. They are genuinely, profoundly messed up. These authors were peering into the absolute darkest pits of human nature long before psychological thrillers were even a genre. They explored obsession, depravity, and the total collapse of the human spirit with a level of intensity that would make a modern horror writer blush. Today, we are stripping away the prestigious reputation of the classics to reveal the nightmare fueling their pages. We are looking at the darkest classic books that are actually way more disturbing than your high school English teacher probably let on. Get ready, because we are descending into a world of literary shadows where the monsters aren't under the bed, they are inside the characters' heads. Let us start with a book that is often called the greatest adventure story ever told, but is actually a grueling descent into madness and obsession, and that is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Most people know the basic premise. A man named Ahab wants to find a giant white whale, but when you actually read the text, you realize this isn't a fishing trip. It is a spiritual suicide mission. Ahab is not a hero. He is a charismatic sociopath who hijacks the lives and souls of his crew to fulfill a personal vendetta against a creature that represents the uncaring silence of the universe. The darkness in this book comes from the sheer, unrelenting nature of Ahab's monomania. He is willing to sacrifice every single man on that ship, men with families and lives, just to strike at something he cannot possibly defeat. Melville spends hundreds of pages detailing the brutal reality of the whaling industry, the filth, the danger, and the cold, making the environment feel like a purgatory. By the time the final confrontation happens, the reader is exhausted, feeling the same sense of doomed inevitability as the crew. It is a book that suggests that human will, when detached from empathy and pushed to its limit, is a force of pure destruction. It is a classic because it captures the terrifying scale of human ego. Moving from the high seas to the foggy streets of London, we encounter the picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. On the surface, it is a witty, sparkling story about high society. But underneath the velvet curtains, it is one of the most disturbing explorations of hedonism ever written. Dorian Gray makes a wish that he will stay young and beautiful while his portrait ages and shows the scars of his sins. What follows is a slow, methodical rot of a human soul. Because Dorian faces no physical consequences for his actions, he loses all sense of morality. He ruins lives, manipulates those who love him, and eventually descends into the darkest underworlds of the city, all while maintaining a perfect, angelic face. The messed up part of this book is the psychological realization that if we were never judged by our appearance, many of us might lose our humanity. The portrait becomes a festering, hideous representation of his true self, hidden away in a locked room. It is a story about the horror of the superficial and the realization that a beautiful face can hide a truly warped interior. Wilde was showing us the nightmare of getting exactly what you want, and it remains a chilling look at the price of vanity. Next, we have to talk about a book that is often misunderstood as a simple monster movie, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. If you think the monster is the one with the bolts in his neck, you haven't been paying attention. The real horror in this book is Victor Frankenstein himself. He is a scientist who plays at being a creator but refuses to take any responsibility for his creation. When his creature first opens its eyes, Victor doesn't see a life. He sees a failure, and he abandons it. The darkness of this book is the utter loneliness and rejection the creature faces. It starts out as an innocent, curious being that desperately wants to love and be loved. It is the cruelty of humanity that turns it into a bringer of chaos. The psychological back and forth between the creator and the created is a brutal game of emotional torment. They destroy everything the other loves in a cycle of revenge that has no winners. Shelley wrote this when she was 19. And the level of existential dread she poured into it is staggering. It questions the ethics of science, the responsibilities of parenthood, and the inherent cruelty of a society that judges based on appearance. It is a messed up story because it shows that humans are often the ones who create the very demons they fear. Speaking of demons, let us look at the ultimate tragedy, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Forget the romance labels or the images of people running through the moors. Heathcliff and Catherine do not have a healthy love story. They have a mutually assured destruction pact. This book is a visceral, angry, and deeply unsettling look at how trauma and rejection can warp a person into something unrecognizable. Heathcliff is not a brooding hero. He is a man fueled by a vengeful fire so hot it consumes two entire generations of families. He spends his life methodically ruining the lives of those who slighted him, even the innocent children of his enemies. The atmosphere of the book is one of constant emotional violence. The characters scream, they strike each other, they dig up graves, and they haunt one another's dreams. Bronte created a world where there is no traditional good character to root for. Everyone is broken, and everyone is trying to break someone else. It is an incredible piece of literature because it refuses to apologize for the darkness of its characters. It is a poison that seeps into the very earth. We cannot discuss dark classics without mentioning Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This novella served as the basis for the movie Apocalypse Now, and it is a searing look at the rot at the center of the human psyche. As the narrator, Marlowe, travels deeper into the Congo, he is searching for a man named Kurtz, who was once seen as a beacon of civilization. What he finds is a man who has completely surrendered to his most primal, brutal urges. Kurtz has set himself up as a self-styled god among the locals, ruling through fear and violence. The messed up core of this book is the suggestion that civilization is just a thin, fragile mask we wear. Once you remove the rules, the consequences, and the watchful eyes of society, the horror that Kurtz whispers about at the end is what remains. It is an indictment of colonialism, certainly, but it is also a terrifying psychological study of how easy it is for an educated, refined person to become a monster when given absolute power in the dark. It is a short read that feels as heavy as a lead weight because of its bleak view of our capacity for change. Now, let us turn to a classic that explores the darkness of the domestic sphere, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. While it is often celebrated for Jane's independence and the romance with Mr. Rochester, there is a very disturbing secret hidden in the attic. The portrayal of Bertha Mason, Rochester's first wife, is one of the most controversial and messed up elements in classic literature. She is locked away in a dark room, described more as an animal than a person, treated as a shameful secret that stands in the way of the protagonist's happiness. When you look at the story from Bertha's perspective, it becomes a horror novel about gaslighting and imprisonment. Rochester is portrayed as a tragic hero, but his actions toward his first wife are undeniably cruel. The book explores the Victorian fears of madness and the way inconvenient women were silenced and hidden away. Even though we want Jane to find happiness, the cost of that happiness is built on the suffering of someone hidden in the shadows of the very house they live in. It is a complex, uneasy classic that forces you to question the morality of its hero and the silent victims of the era. If you thought high school was tough, try The World of Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This is a staple of curricula everywhere, but when you think about it, it is an incredibly dark social experiment. A group of well-bred, upper-class British schoolboys are stranded on an island, and within a matter of weeks, they descend into tribalism and savagery. Golding wrote this as a response to the optimistic boys' adventure stories of the time. He wanted to show that the tendency toward violence isn't something we learn, it is something we have to actively work to suppress. The psychological breakdown of characters like Piggy and Simon is heartbreaking to read because it shows the absolute failure of reason and gentleness in the face of primal fear. The realization at the end, when the boys are finally rescued, is the darkest part of all. They are being taken off the island by a naval officer who is part of a massive, global war. They aren't going back to civilization. They are just graduating to a larger, more organized form of the same violence they practiced on the island. It is a bleak, uncompromising look at the human condition that leaves no room for hope. Let us shift gears to a classic of American literature that deals with the great American dream in a way that is utterly devastating, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. We usually associate this book with parties, flappers, and jazz. But at its heart, it is a story about the hollowness of the human soul. Jay Gatsby is a man who has built an entire life, a fake identity, and a massive fortune, all to chase a ghost from his past. He is obsessed with a version of Daisy Buchanan that doesn't actually exist. The characters in this book are profoundly careless, as the narrator Nick Carraway describes them. They smash up things and creatures and then retreat back into their money or their vast carelessness. The darkness in Gatsby is the realization that no amount of wealth or success can fill the void of a lost dream. It is a book about the rot of the upper class, and the way people use and discard one another in the pursuit of status. The ending is a lonely, cold reality check that suggests the green light we are all reaching for is always just out of our grasp. It is a messed up classic because it exposes the emptiness behind the glitter of the American dream. Another heavy hitter in the world of dark classics is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is the ultimate psychological horror novel about guilt. Raskolnikov, a poor former student in St. Petersburg, decides to commit a crime not just for the money, but to prove a theory. He believes that extraordinary people have the right to commit crimes if it leads to a greater good. He thinks he is a Napoleon, someone above the law. But the moment the deed is done, his mind begins to fracture. The horror of this book is the visceral, sweating, trembling psychological breakdown that follows. It is an exhausting read because you feel the weight of his guilt in your own chest. It explores the idea that we can never truly escape our own moral compass, no matter how much we try to justify our actions with logic. It is a profound look at the hell we create for ourselves when we cross a line we can never uncross. We cannot leave out Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This is perhaps the most controversial classic on this list, and for good reason. It is a book narrated by a man who is a predator, or a monster as he sometimes calls himself. Nabokov makes the book incredibly difficult to navigate because the prose is so beautiful. He uses the most elegant, dazzling language to describe an obsession that is fundamentally repulsive. The messed up nature of the book is the way it forces the reader into a state of cognitive dissonance. Nabokov himself said that the book has no moral, but it is a perfect study of how a sophisticated, intelligent person can use language and logic to justify the unthinkable. It is a book that demands your constant vigilance as a reader, as you have to look past the beautiful words to see the devastating reality of the victim's experience. It remains a stark reminder of the power of manipulation and the darkness that can hide behind a refined mind. Let's look at another classic that deals with the total loss of identity, The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Gregor Samsa wakes up one morning to find he has turned into a giant insect. He has spent his whole life working a job he hates to support them, and the moment he is no longer useful, they turn on him. They don't see the person inside the shell. They only see a burden and a source of disgust. The psychological darkness in Kafka's work is the feeling of being trapped in an absurd, uncaring system where you have no value. It is a story about isolation, the fragility of familial love, and the way society discards those who can no longer contribute. The ending is quietly devastating as the family moves on with their lives, feeling a sense of relief once Gregor is gone. It is a messed up classic because it captures the universal fear of being misunderstood and abandoned by the people who are supposed to love us most. Then we have The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Many people think of this as just a book about an angsty teenager, but if you look closer, it is a very dark exploration of trauma and the loss of innocence. Holden Caulfield is wandering through New York City in a state of what we would now recognize as a mental health crisis. He is grieving the loss of his brother and struggling with the transition into an adult world that he sees as entirely phony. The messed up part of the book is Holden's obsession with saving children from the catchers who would lead them into the corrupt adult world. His cynicism isn't just teenage rebellion. It is a defense mechanism against a world that he finds overwhelmingly cruel. It is a classic that resonates because it captures that specific, lonely moment when you realize that the world isn't as safe or as honest as you were told. We should also mention 1984 by George Orwell. While it is often discussed for its political themes, the psychological horror of the final act is what makes it truly messed up. The way the government, Big Brother, uses Room 101 to dismantle a person's soul is terrifying. They don't just want you to obey. They want you to love them. They use your deepest, most primal fear to break your connection to the person you love most. The realization that even our internal thoughts and our deepest feelings can be colonized and destroyed by a totalitarian power is the ultimate nightmare. Orwell showed us that the most effective way to control a population is not through physical force, but through the systematic destruction of their psychology and their language. The ending is not a call to arms. It is a cold, final defeat that stays with the reader forever. One book that is often overlooked in its darkness is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. It is a grand epic about the Great Depression, but it contains scenes of such raw, visceral suffering that it can be hard to stomach. The Jodid family's journey is a slow-motion car crash of a life where every time they think they have found a foothold, the system kicks them back down. The messed up heart of the book is the realization that other people, the wealthy landowners and the haves, would rather see children starve than lose a fraction of their profits. Steinbeck documents the dehumanization of the Okies with a level of detail that is intended to outrage. The final scene of the book is one of the most famous and controversial in literature, a moment of profound, desperate humanity in the face of absolute ruin. It is a classic that forces us to look at the original sin of economic injustice and the capacity for humans to be indifferent to the suffering of their neighbors. These classic books are not just good because they have survived the test of time. They are good because they are honest about the darkness. They don't offer easy answers or happy endings that tie everything up in a neat bow. They reflect the complexities, the failures, and the shadows of the human experience. They are messed up because we are messed up. They show us that throughout history, humans have struggled with the same questions of morality, obsession, and the search for meaning in a world that can be incredibly cruel. When you read a book like Moby Dick or Wuthering Heights, you are engaging with a long tradition of people trying to make sense of the void. We find comfort in these dark stories, ironically, because they tell us that we aren't alone in our fears. If Herman Melville or Emily Bronte felt this level of existential dread hundreds of years ago, then our own struggles are part of a larger shared human narrative. These books are mirrors. They show us the parts of ourselves we don't want to admit exist. The vengeful parts, the obsessive parts, the careless parts. It is interesting to note that many of these authors faced significant backlash in their time. The picture of Dorian Gray was used against Oscar Wilde in his trials. Frankenstein was often dismissed as a ghastly whim of a young girl. The Grapes of Wrath was burned in some communities. This reaction from society proves that these books were hitting a nerve. They were uncovering truths that people wanted to keep hidden. A messed-up classic is often a book that was too honest for its era. Think about why these stories continue to be taught and read. It isn't just for the grammar or the historical context. It is because they speak to the ID, the primal part of our brains. They explore the boundaries of the social contract. What happens when we stop being civilized? What happens when we prioritize our own desires over the lives of others? The classics provide a safe space to explore these dangerous questions. They are cautionary tales that have become the pillars of our culture. The psychological impact of these stories is what makes them so enduring. We remember the horror of Kurtz or the guilt of Raskolnikov because we feel those emotions ourselves. Literature allows us to inhabit the minds of people who have gone further than we ever would. We walk to the edge of the abyss with these characters, look down, and then return to our lives with a better understanding of where the edge is located. We also have to appreciate the sheer craftsmanship of these dark visions. To write a book that can still make a reader uncomfortable a century after it was published is a massive achievement. The prose in Frankenstein or Heart of Darkness is so evocative that it bypasses the logical brain and goes straight to the nervous system. These authors were masters of atmosphere, using the environment to reflect the internal state of their characters. They didn't have special effects or soundtracks. They only had words, and they used them to build entire worlds of shadow. As you look back on this list, you might realize that the prestige of the classics is often a way for us to sanitize them. We call them important, so we don't have to call them unsettling. We put them on the syllabus so we can discuss them in a controlled environment. But once you take them home and read them in the quiet of the night, their true nature is revealed. They are wild, dangerous, and deeply messed up reflections of the human condition. So the next time you see a copy of Moby Dick or Wuthering Heights, don't just see a school assignment. See a challenge. See a chance to peer into the mind of someone who was brave enough to document the darkness of their own heart. These books have survived because the truths they contain are universal. They are a treasure map of the human shadow. And while the journey through their pages may be dark and difficult, the perspective you gain on the other side is invaluable. The classics remind us that being human is a complex and often frightening endeavor. They show us that we contain both the capacity for incredible creation and horrific destruction. By acknowledging the messed up parts of our history and our literature, we become more aware and more empathetic. We learn to recognize the Ahabs and the Dorian Grays of the world, and perhaps we learn how not to become them ourselves. Ultimately, these books are a testament to the power of the written word. They prove that an idea, once recorded, can live on and continue to challenge society for generations. They are the troublemakers of the literary world, and we are better for having them. So embrace the darkness, lean into the discomfort, and remember that some of the best stories ever told are the ones that are actually really messed up. They are the ones that remind us that the most interesting things in the world are often the ones we are most afraid to talk about. Keep exploring those dusty shelves, because you never know what kind of nightmare is waiting to be discovered inside a beautiful, leather-bound classic. Thank you for taking this journey into the dark history of literature with us. Keep your mind open, your curiosity sharp, and never stop looking for the truth behind the elegant prose. The classics have so much more to say than we think, if only we are willing to listen to their whispers from the shadows. Stay curious, keep reading, and remember, the darkest stories are often the ones that have the most to teach us.